he goes still fifth council, and we're about to begin our quarterly meeting. Today is Thursday, June 10th, and I thank you all for being here. As you know, we have started the practice of beginning the Youth Development Council quarterly meetings with a land acknowledgement, and I'd like to start that now. I'd like to acknowledge the many tribes and bands who call Oregon their ancestral territory and honor the ongoing relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we now call home. We recognize the continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and the subsequent bands within those tribes, and now thank them for continuing to teach us how we might all be here together. All right. So for everyone on the line, this is a reminder that today's meeting is a public meeting, which means members of the council will engage with staff throughout the meeting. We do have some votes that we need to have. So as we take roll call, we'll confirm that we have a quorum. If you are a member of the public, please refrain from comments at this point. We do have a section of the agenda at the end of our meeting, which we anticipate will start around 11:40, where there's a public comment section, and we would invite you to share anything you'd like to at that point. Each public comment can last up to 3 minutes. And as a reminder to all attendees, please state your name when you start speaking, and this meeting is being recorded. And also, if you're a member of the public and you'd like to actually say something during that public comment section, if you can please send a chat to Lindsay so that she is aware. We have a list that we maintain, and so she will put you on that list for that segment. I think we're about ready to begin roll call. Melissa, are you ready?
I am. Thank you, Celeste. That was great. This is Melissa Gallardo with the Youth Development Division. I'll call the names of the council members. Pamela Abernethy. Here. Janet Ahrens.
Here.
Jaime Arredondo.
Presente.
Zan Ojero. Aisha Tuberi. Eric Cardella.
Here.
Parasa Chanrami.
Here.
Alicia Hayes.
Here.
Janine Hartley.
Here.
Celeste Jansen.
Here.
Maricela Ortega Guzman.
Here.
Andy Leonard. Tabidi Lewis. Adrian Livingston.
Here.
Christina McMahon. I just spoke to Christina. She's going to be calling in, so I know that she's on her way. Destiny Ortiz. Jeff Parker. Molly Rogers. Diana Rojas. Karen Spencer.
She'll be joining shortly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did someone just chime in?
I'm here.
Yes, sorry, this is Maricela. Diana will be joining shortly.
Great. Thanks, Maricela.
I
Karen,
think I heard
sorry,
Diana.
go ahead.
I
This is
think I
Brian.
heard Diana speak.
Yep, I heard her.
Okay, great.
Diana, do you want to say something?
Sorry, my voice is a little out, but I'm here.
Thank you. Glad you're here.
And I am here too.
And that's Karen. Okay, Karen Spencer. John Teague. Liz Thorne.
Here.
And Koi Vu. Not yet. Okay, I'm going to mute and count up numbers real quick. Looks like currently we have 13 members present, which is exactly what we need for quorum. And that does not count Christina, who is trying to join by phone any minute now.
Great. And I noticed that Molly Rogers is on the call. So although she's not here for the roll call, she might also join her, go back to her desk in a second and be here as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, great. Yeah, now we can hear you.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, great. So Molly is here. We have 14. We are concerned about quorum. We have 2 items on the agenda today where we are going to be asking the council to make a vote. Given the fact this is a longer meeting and we're not certain that everyone can stay with us for the entire meeting, we've decided to move the director's report, which would normally begin right now, to after the 2 items that require a vote. So if you look on the agenda, what we're going to do is now begin the request for application and appeal process presentation. We will have a break after that. We will continue with the county and tribal juvenile crime prevention plans. We will have a break after that. And then we will insert the director's report. So that director's report will happen right before the committee reports. I think with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Cord.
Real quickly, Cord, before you go, I just got a text from Christina McMahon. She is on the phone. She's guest with the phone number ending in 2859. So Christina is on the line, and she just confirmed that. She just saying, yeah, we can't hear her. I think she's trying to speak, but she's there. She tells me she's there.
I want to say that it's either #6 or *6 will unmute you from a phone line. So I don't know if you can hear me, Christina, if you want to try that. And Melissa may be able to unmute as well.
She's just texted me giving me a confirmation of the number. So
I'm unmuted.
there she is.
Wonderful. We hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you all. I've been here the whole time. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Brian knows I'm challenged.
We're
Great.
glad to have you, Christina. Good morning. All right.
Good morning.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is Cord Bucher, Acting Chief of Staff with the Youth Development Division. Thanks for joining us bright and early this morning. I am going to be presenting to you about the 2021-23 RFA process, the Youth Grants RFA process. You heard about last council meeting. We're going to be providing an update. Melissa, are you able to get the slideshow up on the perfect? So I'll go ahead and ask for the next slide and tell you what we're going to cover today. So I'm going to provide a recap of the RFA process, the approval requirements, and what YDC approved back in March. I'll give an update on the progress of the RFA, which is recently launched. I'll be providing some additional details on the process. So we'll talk about the evaluation of applications, awards, and appeals. And then there'll be an opportunity for YDC action on the RFA process and availability of funding. And then I'll provide a really brief summary of the next steps and the timeline where we're at now. Next slide, please. And just to give you the 3 big takeaways here, the current RFAs, the youth grant RFAs are open, and they'll be open through July 13th. So we're currently right now in the Q&A phase. We're getting questions. We've done a couple of public information sessions for grantees, and we'll be providing responses to clarifying questions. And the application portal is open, so it's underway. That's the first thing. The next is that there's a new award approval process up for YDC consideration. I will talk a little bit about this later in the slideshow. And then there will be an opportunity for YDC action at the end of the presentation. So, we're definitely trying to keep the quorum so that we can have the opportunity for a vote on some of this stuff. Next slide, please. So I'll start with the RFA process background. This presentation is broken into sections. So at the end of each section, I'll pause and open it up to questions, just so if there's something that catches your attention, I'll make sure there are opportunities for you to ask me about stuff. So here I just have a summary of the Oregon administrative rules that govern the roles for the division and the council when it comes to our grants. So the community investments, gang prevention and intervention, and re-engagement grant processes have language in the OARs where it says that the division will establish the process for issuing grants. The process must be approved by the council, and the council reapproves that process each biennium or as frequently as determined necessary. The laws for the, it should be the YDC statutes, sorry about that, state that the council determines the availability of funding for community-based youth development programs. We've been working to understand exactly what determining the availability of funding is, but that is ultimately, we believe, an item that the council will take action on. And so that's one of the things that will come up later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. The RFA process we presented initially back in March, where we were at, we covered the award types, the purposes and priorities of the grants, which is another statutory role for the council to approve the purpose and priorities of our funding, which we did back in March. Talked about the application process materials. We shared information about the RFA awareness campaigns that were underway. We did some community Zoom meetings before and since the launch. We shared an anticipated timeline, which we'll update you on a little later. So we've actually begun, we have presented the process and gotten council approval, but today we're adding more information and we're seeking to get approval on some other specific aspects of that process that we didn't discuss back in March. So next slide, please. And I'll pause if anybody had any questions about these rules and statutes and why we brought those up. All right. I'll now talk about the status of the RFAs. So just as a reminder, the youth grants consists of two different RFAs. There's a community investment RFA. This community investments is historically what we have called our competitive grants, released every biennium. Within community investments, there are the Youth Promise Grant, which previously has been called Youth and Community. We just renamed it just so it's a little easier to distinguish from the community investments overall. Youth Solutions, which really is kind of a revamped version of the Youth and Innovation Grant. The Youth Workforce Grant, which we have previously been doing, and the Youth Violence and Gang Prevention Grant, which has also been one that we have had in previous biennia. So those four grants make up community investments. And then the Reengagement Opportunity Grant RFA is its own RFA because re-engagement has some distinct requirements around applicant eligibility, participant eligibility, service delivery requirements. That RFA is separate, and that grant funding is separate from the other community investment funding as well. A quick note that the re-engagement collaborative grants, which we did have a few back in 2020 that came out, we actually are not planning to launch that until later. And we're really primarily doing that because we've realized that in order to support collaborative work, it's important to know who is providing the program work. That it makes more sense to begin to build collaborative work on top of the service delivery work that we're supporting with these opportunity grants. So we'll be redesigning and launching the re-engagement collaborative funding a little later. And I'll mention that again in a bit. Next slide, please. So both RFAs were launched, I guess it's actually now 2 weeks ago. I think that when I first wrote this, it was last week, but they've been open for about 2 weeks. The YDD has been holding virtual public information Q&A sessions. Each RFA has had its own virtual session, and they close on Tuesday, July 13th at 1 p.m. So there's still well over a month for folks to get in, review the RFAs, and submit applications. And I'll pause if there are any questions about the status of the RFAs right now. All right, next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the evaluation of applications. This is something we want to provide some more detailed information to the council on. So when the RFAs close, we carry out an evaluation process YDD is doing this in coordination with ODE procurement. We have a fantastic procurement officer, Noemi. I don't know if she's on the call, but she's just been a real superb collaborator on this work and is deeply involved in all of the RFA work with us. So there are 4 main steps here in the evaluation process. When applications come in, there's a minimum qualification review. So the first thing we do with procurement is check to make sure that the application meets all of the requirements and that it's eligible to be reviewed and scored. Following that, the applications are assigned to panels of reviewers, which I'll talk about later. The review panels will convene following their scoring to discuss and finalize scores. And then the final scores are used to develop the award slates. So we tally up final scores. As mentioned in the previous council presentation, there are going to be some regional awards where we're trying to highlight the top application from every region of the state to ensure that we have a broader geographic distribution of funding. And then all of the other applications are ranked and funded according to a few different criteria, which I will talk about. Next slide, please. The review panels consist of volunteer reviewers and YDD staff. Each panel is assigned a set of applications. Historically, it's somewhere between 8 and 12 applications that are reviewed, varies depending on the number of both review panels and applicants. Right now, we're recruiting volunteer reviewers. And if you know of anyone who's interested, please refer them to the director or to me. Reviewers receive training on the SM Apply system where the applications are submitted. The reviews are also done in that system. We provide a scoring rubric, and there's some general evaluation practices and expectations that are discussed. For example, all reviewers must affirm no conflicts or potential conflicts of interest before they review each application. We also recruit more than enough reviewers so that if a conflict should arise, then we can substitute a different reviewer to make sure that we still have a good multi-person panel reviewing each application. Next slide, please. So each reviewer will read and score their panel's assigned applications individually. They have this SM Apply platform. It makes it really easy to read the application and score it simultaneously. The scores are saved in that system, and then the panels will convene. All of the scores are provided then to the panel, and there's a facilitated discussion. Procurement and YDD staff help to lead that, where the discussion focuses on scores that deviate. So we don't necessarily require everyone to discuss every single score of every question, but anytime that reviewers have scores that significantly deviate, so last time it would be a 2-point difference among reviewers, that would be flagged, and there would be a discussion about why reviewers scored the way they did, and there was an opportunity to revise scores. So the final scores are compiled from the panel, and then that leads us to creating the award slates. I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions about the review panels and evaluation happening there.
Cord, question. I actually work with a foundation, and we train people to be grant reviewers, and I would love to send something onto them to say, if you want to continue your service, here's something that you can do with the state. Is there a job description of volunteers or something that I could send to them?
I know that we've usually have something like that. If you'd like, let's connect and we'll get that information to you, and we'd love for you to share that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Question 2, Cord. Have we considered looking into stipends for those volunteers? I just think about, we want to pull from community to be at this table, right? And it takes time, it takes expertise, and just wondering if that's something that we've explored.
Jaime, it's a good question. I don't know that we've ever discussed that. We have talked about whether to shift to like an evaluation firm, university or private evaluation process, if that would help us to just shore it up and then just ensure the timeliness and effectiveness. We've had really good experience with volunteers. I think probably about 2/3 of the folks that volunteer are coming from either Department of Education or other state agencies. But we've also managed to get folks from a lot of different communities to participate. I think that's I don't really know the answer to whether that's something we could potentially do, but I'll just make a note of it, and I guess it's something we could at least find out about for the next time.
Yeah, Jaime, I appreciate the question and recommendation.
All right, I'll go ahead and ask for the next slide then. So once we've finished with the evaluation process with the review panels, there will be a final ranking of applications in each of the different award types. So within the community investment RFA, we'll rank the applications for the Promise Grant, we'll rank the applications for the Workforce Grant, et cetera. The Reengagement grants will be ranked based on score. As mentioned, there will be the regional awards. So essentially the way it works is that there are regions of the state where the top applicant from each, the top scoring application, the intention is to award at least one applicant from each region. And so those would be pulled out and identified. And then all the remaining applications across the state would be ranked, not by region, but by total, by the all-encompassing scores of all remaining applicants. So then it kind of goes back to the original way that we would normally do rankings, where you just rank from top score to lowest score. But the goal is to actually pull out those regional awards. And so the total available funding per initiative, this is a question we often get: how much money is there for re-engagement? How much money is there for the Promise Grant or the Solutions Grant? So a few different things will determine that. First is the legislative approved budget, which we are still waiting for. The Ways and Means Committee has not yet finalized our budget, but we're optimistic that it will be at current service level, or hopeful. Funding requirements. So re-engagement grants are funded by the re-engagement funds from the Student Success Act. So in some cases, the funding is designated for a specific grant type. The gang prevention intervention grants also work this way. There is a potential look at score quality. So we'll review scores. In the past, we have sometimes identified if there's a cutoff based on like a big drop in scoring, and low scoring applications may not be funded. And then initiative plans and priorities. So, as I noted, the Reengagement Collaborative grants, we want to actually delay launching that until we have completed the opportunity grant process. So our intention is to kind of evaluate how many applications we have, total funding, and then determine how much funding to reserve for the collaborative work. So that's something we're doing a little bit differently, but we want to make sure that we put some resources aside for that long-term collaborative effort. Next slide, please. So this is where the process changes from previous YDC approval. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'm happy to answer questions about it. I know Brian has shared in the director's update a discussion we had with the executive committee. A little bit of conversation between YDD and DOJ just to kind of confirm our understanding of this, but we're asking to shift away from the way that previously the council would approve a slate of awardees at the end and have the director approve that slate. And instead, we're asking the council to vote to approve the process and essentially to approve the availability of funding for the division to actually carry out the work of making the grants. And I'll just say briefly, there are a few reasons for this. And one is that we're trying to really follow what our rules and statutes say, and there is some ambiguity, but we think that this really aligns with that. It also helps us to move away from some of the concerns around conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest by not having council members approving the individual awards, but really approving the process by which the division makes awards. It aligns with the way that other state commissions and boards do their funding approval, where it really is priorities and the strategic goals of the funding that is set by the council or commission, and then the division or agency carries out the work of making those awards, and then of course reports back. So, so that is a change, is that the council will not be asked to approve a slate, but we're asking instead to assent to the process and the availability of funding. So what we would do then is send out notices of intent to award following the division's finalization of awardees. So that will indicate a decision on funding. The notice of intent to award may be a notice of funding or notice of declining funding, but everyone will get information about this. And then applicants who are declined funding will have an opportunity to submit an appeal. Next slide, please. So the YDD OARs actually require that the council approve an appeal process for community investment grants, but we're actually going to have this same process for the re-engagement opportunity grants. So just for consistency, all of the grants in these two RFAs will have the same opportunity to appeal if they are declined funding. So the way it works is that there's a 7-day window following the notice of intent to award when there is an opportunity for a declined applicant to file a written protest, which must meet some qualifications here, really just information they have to provide, including the grounds for the protest. So YDD and ODE procurement will address all timely submitted protests within reasonable time and issue a written decision. And of course, that information must be included for us to do so. Just to jump to the next slide, and I'll answer Sam's question in a second. So something that I want to make note of is that all applicants may request information about their application, such as their scores, the rank, any notes from reviewers. You don't have to submit a protest in order to receive this. We just ask that you submit the request through the ODE Public Information Request Portal. We'll include a link to that when we send out the notices. That one helps us to track the requests that are coming in and ensure that we're getting that information out in a timely fashion. And it also allows folks to find out what they want to know before they decide, oh, like, I want to make a protest or not. And I saw a question from Sam Coe. So in past RFAs, we have had, usually it's been an inquiry about scoring. I don't know that we've ever really had what I would consider like we've had more of like, why didn't I get funded? But in terms of someone saying specifically, I've identified an error that you have made that I would like rectified, I can't recall that happening. But usually the main thing that a declined applicant wants to know is, well, how did I fare and why did I score poorly? So we try to provide that information, and pretty often, you know, that does get requested. And once it's provided, we've also sometimes provided technical assistance informally following the completion of all of the awarding. We've sometimes gone back to folks who really wanted to know how to have a better application and reviewed their application and provided some feedback. And so that's something that we may be able to do. Most recently with the re-engagement grants, we were able to provide technical assistance awards to some of the folks that were declined full funding. So that is, you know, that's, you know, another possibility. But yeah, as Celeste just put in the chat that she has not seen a formal protest, and generally it's mostly folks wanting just information on the process and where they fared in scoring. So, so we can jump back to the appeals process slide just so that's up. So just want to make sure that folks see this and see if there are any other questions about that process before we move on. I'm just checking the chat too, just to see if I overlooked anything. Nope. Okay, Melissa, next slide, please. So as mentioned, applicants can get information about their application and scores and ranking. This is actually open to the public, so anyone can request this, but this is general information we try to make available to both successful and unsuccessful applicants. Next slide, please. For the YDC and the general public, so following the close of the appeals process, a final slate or final slates of awardees will be provided to the YDC and made publicly available on the YDD website. So we'll wait until we've kind of cleared that threshold of any potential protests and processing that. And then we would come back to the council and say, this is the final slate. And we'll talk about the timeline in a bit, but our goal is to provide a full presentation on the 2021-23 Youth Grants Awards to the council at the first YDC meeting following the finalization. So there is a council meeting in September. If we're at that stage, we would try to provide that then. If we're in the middle of, say, the appeals process, then we'll just provide the latest on where we're at and plan to provide a full presentation and ultimately a celebration of the 21-23 grants as soon as we're able to. I just saw a question pop up in the chat. Let me just check. So Sam asked if there is a pre-submittal session for prospective applicants so they know what the YDC is looking for in the mandatory requirements. So we actually just held those last week. They weren't required, but we had 2 open virtual meetings that information was put out when we announced the RFAs. Applicants can actually submit questions to ODE procurement about any aspect of the RFAs. I believe we're accepting questions for maybe 1 or 2 more weeks. And then we'll provide a full written question and answer document that'll be available to every applicant with all those questions addressed. So we did have those 2 public sessions though, Sam. And I believe with that, I'm gonna go ahead and ask for the next slide. And I can answer any other questions here, but I'll go ahead and share essentially what the opportunities for potential YDC action are. One is the approval of the evaluation, award notification, and appeals processes as presented. And the other is making grant funding approved by the legislature available for the Youth Development Division to make the 2021-23 Youth Grant Awards. I've separated these into 2, but I'll leave it to the chair to determine how to move forward with that. I probably should pause. I know we want to make sure that folks talk about any conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest. And then on the next slide, if you want to put that up, Melissa, I've actually got some potential language that could be used for the motions. So I can quickly mention just, we talked a little bit about the potential and actual conflicts of interest as that might apply here. With these actions, we're not actually making any decisions on funding. So I believe that this would be different from the way that we would have you approving. Normally, the council would be approving a slate of awards where we were naming organizations and funding amounts. This is really just similar to the March meeting and approval of process. Certainly if anyone feels that they have a conflict or potential conflict, we would invite you to name that. But in this particular instance, there are no actual direct financial benefits coming out of this decision or action.
Cord, thank you for that presentation. Before I entertain a motion from the council, I'm just curious if anyone has any additional questions, anything that we need to recover, or if you'd like to think about what this would look like in practice. I'm just curious if anybody has anything that they need some clarifying information on. Eric, yeah.
Hi, thanks, Celeste. Cord, thanks for the presentation. I appreciate. I actually feel like I have a better understanding of even the transition to, for some of the new grant kind of names, even more than last month. So thank you for providing the clarity. You mentioned, Cord, that this proposed change to external reviewers, as a step and then moving to the director for final review mirrored what other councils and state commissions are doing. Could you maybe speak to the role of those other state boards or commissions or councils in terms of members? I mean, would our role be similar to what those other groups are doing? I don't know if this is a good analog or not, but I know the Early Learning Council with the Early Learning Division, I believe, has a similar process where the ELD director ultimately makes final decisions. But I believe they have a review committee where there may be council members that are involved in a review process along the way. So could you just speak to that? I don't know what the closest analog would be, but maybe just an example of what those other commissions and councils may do in terms of council member involvement in the process.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. That's a great question. So I think one example that I was looking at were workforce boards. So the State Workforce Talent Development Board. I reached out to the executive director of that board to kind of understand how, when they have funding, how that works. And essentially it's a lot like this, where that board is really setting strategic vision and the overall policy direction around their area of work, and authorizing funding. So saying there's $1 million or $2 million for this particular effort that we want to make, but then asking for the agency, in this case, the office at HEC, that would be carrying out the work of putting out an application, evaluating proposals, making funding decisions, and then reporting back. So that's I think kind of maybe one example of it. In terms of a council role within reviewing, I mean, this is a question that kind of came up in the past, when we were doing in the previous model where the council is reviewing a slate of awardees, our understanding was we should not have council members involved at all in the review process, since they are approving the review process, but or approving the results of the review process, I should say. I think that if the approval of final awards is being done by the division, then I feel like there is less of an issue with a council member who does not have any conflicts or potential conflicts of interest being interested in participating in a review panel. I feel like that actually, this clears the way for that. I would say that if a council member is interested, I would encourage you to talk with Director Detman about that. We know that there's been some interest. I think some youth members in the past have expressed a desire to better understand what these programs do and how we decide how to award funding. So I think that, generally speaking, part of the reason that things are done this way is because often these boards or commissions are composed of folks who are affected by funding decisions. I think that in a way, setting strategic direction but not making funding decisions allows for the board. I think probably a more effective role, but it also eliminates that challenge. I mean, I was on a commission briefly where a number of folks were actually recipients of the funding that commission administered. So the entire funding process was handled externally from that commission. So that's kind of how I've understood it to work. I don't know if that's totally clear answer, but
yeah, no, that's helpful. I mean, I think you answered a follow-up question that I probably didn't verbalize, which is, is there, with this proposed change, is there an opportunity for those council members who do not have a conflict of interest, who may have, interest in being involved in that review process, to get involved? So it sounds like the answer is maybe, and there may be a model for that.
Yeah, if anyone's interested, I think what we would do is talk with procurement and DOJ just to verify. But my sense is their concern was when the council was approving a slate of awards, that they wouldn't want the council member voting to approve something they've reviewed. And alternately, we wouldn't want a council member having to abstain from voting because they were a reviewer, and then we jeopardize our quorum. So it was kind of a practical consideration then that we might be able to look at differently now.
Yeah, and I just to clarify, certainly I for one appreciate, I don't currently, but in previous, biennia, I have been one of those, council members who has, is involved with organizations who have been, applying for funds. So I appreciate that very much. And I think this makes it clearer what the council's role is in the process, as opposed to, making the awards. That said, I think particularly the work that's happened with the strategic planning subcommittee, and really want to be thoughtful about aligning our mission and our funding and the overall work of the council. I think it's an opportunity for our council members to serve, in some capacity. So I think if there's an opportunity to explore that for those council members who have that interest, and if this change opens up that opportunity for engagement in that way in the review process, I think it would be worth considering. So I'll just go on the record saying that I'm in favor, of the change from a process perspective, as long as we don't lose council member involvement.
Yeah, and Eric, hey, this is Brian, Eric, and others, other YDC members, and the public. Again, Brian Detman, Youth Development Division Director. I feel very strongly that this does open up that opportunity. I think that having council members who are interested and have the time, let's be clear that when you're on evaluation committee, it is in addition to the time that you're already committing to be on the council, already committing to be on a committee, to be on an evaluation committee, is an additional investment of time. Maybe back to the point that Jaime was making about like stipends and so on. It would be quite an investment of time. But all that being said, I think that we're very much interested in this shift, permitting and paving the way for kind of deeper involvement at the, among kind of grantees, community-based entities in our council, right? Because now the conflict of interest stuff, I think, will be less of an issue. And so my hope and thinking is that we can actually be much more intentional about bringing more of that kind of grantee / community based voice onto the council, inviting involvement on evaluation committees as time allows for folks. And then I think one of the things that we'll have to do over the next year or two is look at our administrative rules and ensure that there's better clarity, because to Cord's earlier point, there is some ambiguity here, and our re-engagement related rules, I think, are a little bit, they're broad and allow for the very clearly the kind of process and approach. Our community investment administrative rules, it's not that they don't allow for this, but they're frankly just a little bit more confusing. So we want to clean some of that up, and we'll work on that in the next year or so.
Thank you, Brian and Cord.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks, Brian. I think one last thing I would mention is that, this is back in March, we made an initial presentation, and then, as we were kind of looking at how this whole RFA process was going to run, this question arose about, well, do we want to take a look at the process, and is there some clarification and role clarity that we can develop here, which is why we've arrived at this change. But the long-term goal is that ultimately we would be bringing everything to the council for approval in the spring, so essentially what we talked about last time in March and what we have talked about this time. So the whole gamut of the RFA process would be brought to the council. And I think that leading up to that, there's definitely opportunity for more work between the division and the council on the priorities of the funding, and to really involve the council in refining aspects of the RFA process. Because ultimately I think the ideal thing is for the council to help build this thing and then put it into motion, and then the division carries it out to conclusion. That's kind of the model that we're working towards here.
Hi, it's Janet. Celeste, can I make a quick comment?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, Janet Ahrens. I like the process. It makes sense to me that we would be the policy body and that the staff would be the execution body. One of the things that I would miss going forward that maybe we could tweak a little bit is hearing about the grants, being able to see more of the information and where the emphasis has been on grant awards. So if we could get some, and I think some other people have commented about this too, have more information about the grants, the things that are exciting or the things that are unusual, that we could be engaged in some of the stories of the decisions that were made and the kinds of programs that are out there.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. Absolutely. And that, I guess I'll ask, well, I don't want to skip because I know we want to keep this slide up, but the next slide I'll talk about timeline, and we do plan to provide some form of update to the council in September, depending on where we're at with finalizing awards. But we're really thinking through about how do we celebrate the results of this. One thing that we have tweaked in our applications is every applicant is being asked to provide essentially an elevator pitch for what their work is, so that we can more effectively just provide like a full accounting of all the programs that we're funding and what they do. Just trying to get that information together so that it's easier for us to share and say, this is the spread, this is the map, these are the programs we funded, this is what each of these programs does, here are some highlights of things that we're really excited to be funding. And so we recognize that that's going to be something we want to put more work into, is still finding a way to have some form of I think I keep using the word celebration because I don't know that there's a better one, but really to sort of get back with the council and say, hey, like, we are very excited about the result of this and want to share it with you, and recognize what it is that these resources are going to go out and accomplish. So definitely.
Thanks, Janet and Cord. Any additional questions or comments from the council? All right, well, thank you. I definitely think this is a much cleaner process. This is an easier process to recruit council members with too, in that I think it's much, it's helpful to have the process be very clean and articulate within the council and have us play a particular role. So I'm excited for this change. In order to make these changes, we will need to approve them as the council. And thank you, Cord, for putting some language up. So as a reminder, we are talking about the process, which we have some language that we could change, we could adopt, we can make a decision about that, but that's in the first potential motion. And then if you remember back to what the language was in the statute, it said that we really do need to basically approve the funding that's available. So that's the second one. That's why those are separate. They don't need to be separate. We can certainly in one motion approve them both. But I'd like to ask you all if there is a motion out there that you'd like to entertain. So could I have a motion? Does the council member have a motion?
This is Janet Aaron. Sure, I'll make a motion and to adopt 1 and 2 together with the language that you've drafted here.
Okay, do I have a second?
Ojiro will second.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, and the motion is to approve or to adopt both the potential motion 1 and 2. Is there any questions or any comments for the motion on the floor? Okay, in that case, we're going to move on to a vote. And because we're doing this remotely, we are using a roll call vote. So Melissa, are you ready?
I am. Thank you, Celeste. Pamela Abernathy.
Yes. Approve.
Janet Aarons.
Aye.
Jaime Arredondo.
Yes.
Zan Ojiro.
Yes.
Let's see, I don't think we have Aishatu Berry. Eric Cardella.
Yes.
Parasa Chenrami.
Aye.
Alicia Hayes.
Yes.
Janine Hartley.
Yes.
Celeste Jansen.
Approve.
Maricela Ortega Guzman.
Yes.
Andy Leonard. Tabidi Lewis. Adrian Livingston.
Yes.
Christina McMahon.
Yes.
Destiny Ortiz. Jeff Parker. Molly Rogers.
Yes.
Diana Rojas.
She wrote yes in the chat, Melissa.
Thank you. Karen Spencer.
Yes.
John Teague. Liz Thorne.
Yes.
Koi Vu. All right, that is everyone, and that is enough votes to pass.
All right, thank you, everyone. Cord, I believe you had more slides where we have some timelines to cover as well.
I do. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for that vote. And may I have the next slide, please? So this is a very abbreviated timeline, but as mentioned, July 13th, the RFA will close. In July and August, we'll have the evaluation and award process. So towards the end of July, we'll have our reviewers receiving their grants to read. Our hope is by mid-August to have all of our scoring done, and then the council will, or excuse me, the division will take some time to just get our slates together, verify all of the scores, develop our final decision for the director. Once that's done, in late August or early September, notices of intent to award will be distributed. And then the September 9th council meeting, we'll have an update on where we're at with this. If we have completed the award process and gotten through the appeals window, then we may have a final list of awardees to share. And if not, then we'll talk about when we will bring back full information about all of the funding and the work that we'll be supporting in the new biennium. And then the launch of grants. I've noted summer, fall, since we have projects that programs may be applying for funding to support ongoing work. So in some cases, the funding may, once received, be supporting work that is underway. In other cases, grantees will be starting their work in the fall. And so we'll be seeing the work begin into the fall of 2021. And I think by December, we'll have, I think, a pretty substantial update on where we're at with the launch of all of these grants. So that's the timeline as it stands right now, which we feel pretty good about. And I will end my presentation there. And if there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. But we really appreciate everyone's time on this and input. And we're excited about this next move.
Great, thank you, Cord. Just as 2 items for follow-up for the YDD staff, it would be great for us to revisit the process for recruiting reviewers and confirm that YDC council members can participate in that, and just if we can get some feedback about if that's possible, and if so, for whom, that would be wonderful. I think there will be some interest on the council. And then also just that idea of continuing to not just review the overall like geographic spread and number of grants, but also hear some stories. There was some suggestions about some ways to do that. I really like the idea of sharing kind of the brief narrative about what each grant is about. We've never seen that before. And so actually as a council member, I haven't had as much clarity about what the programs are. So it would be nice to see that. And I love any other suggestions. I saw something in the chat about inviting grantees to occasionally come and share their story. So something to continue that process. And we of course follow and then continuous improvement thread. So we'll make some updates in this year and see how it goes, but I'd love to see that over the course of the next few months as well. All right, thank you. That was exciting. I feel like we are now moving in the, 21st century. We're doing what other councils do and operating in a way that is consistent with other divisions. I think that's very important, and I'm excited to see this change occur. Okay, so we can take a 10-minute break. We are ahead of schedule by 5 minutes, which is great. So it is now on my phone. It's 9:25. So I ask if you can be back at your desk in about 9 minutes so that we can begin promptly in 10 minutes with the next section of the meeting. So thank you all. Hello, council members. If you could slowly make your way back to your desk or to your computer, we will begin in about a minute. All right, welcome back from a quick break. Thank you, Parasa, for also lifting up Jamie's idea or Jaime's idea as a third action item for the YDD team, just to find out if it's possible to offer a stipend for grant reviewers. So that's also something to note. Thank you. Okay. So we now have the Juvenile Justice Report, and there is an action item during this segment as our next item. I'd like to invite Anya and Molly to begin the next portion of the agenda.
Anya's going to take the lead on this.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Celeste and Molly. Good morning, everyone. For the record, my name is Anya Siki, and I'm the Juvenile Crime Prevention Manager for the Youth Development Division. And I hope Melissa will help me put a slide deck that I prepared for this conversation today. Hopefully that will help keeping us on track. Similarly to the RFA that Cord was talking about, we are now trying to allocate funds for the 21-23 biennium for the purposes of juvenile crime prevention. And Melissa, if you don't mind moving the slide to the next one. Thank you. Just as a quick reminder why we're doing and what requires us to do it, there are two statutes that guide our decision-making as far as allocation of the juvenile crime prevention funding. And there's a role that the Youth Development Council plays in that. So the Youth Development Council provides juvenile crime prevention funds to counties and tribes for programs focused on youth at high risk for juvenile crime and establishes assessment criteria for the local high risk juvenile crime prevention plans. That's the foundation for how we make our decisions. The Council must review the components of local high-risk juvenile crime prevention plans developed under our ORS 417-855. The Youth Development Council shall award a minimum grant to small counties. The minimum grant level shall be determined by the Council through a public process and reviewed by the Council biennially. So that's one of the action items on the agenda that we will get to later. Each county lead agency is required to submit a JCP plan in accordance with the JCP planning guidelines and the statement of local public safety coordinating council or county's governing body approval of submitted plan. And the council must work with the tribal governments in the development of a JCP plan, purposefully using separate lines for county and tribal plans as they are different. Melissa, if you don't mind moving to the next one. Thank you. So very quickly, the required elements of a county juvenile crime prevention plan. You may notice I use prevention twice. That's intentional because JCP has 3 sections in it. There is a prevention funding, there is basic funding, and there is diversion, and they need to be connected. So YDC makes decisions about juvenile crime prevention. Basic and diversion are under Oregon Youth Authority. So with that, the counties were required to provide information on local county juvenile justice issues, needs, barriers, and service gaps. They had to submit us a summary of key data supporting the recommended strategies. They have to present us with the evidence of community partners' participation and support of the proposed plan. So now no lead agency should operate in vacuum on their own. They have to provide to us a description of how JCP basic and diversion and other funds are used in the continuum of services. That's the connection to the OYA's funding. They have to provide us with a description of services, oops, typo, services, not series, and providers, apologies for that, and the youth population to be served. Could be low-level offenders, could be non-offenders, so that's the type of thing, and the demographics. And also they have to demonstrate that they will be using evidence-based practices, and whatever services will be provided will have cultural appropriateness with them. Melissa, could you show us the next slide, please? Now, I want to pause here and on the evidence-based practice and cultural appropriateness. So evidence-based practice checklist was required for each of the program to be completed. Juvenile crime prevention funding is subject to ORS 182.515, which requires that no less than 75% of juvenile crime prevention funding has to be expended on evidence-based practices, which leaves room for 25% that does not need to meet that criteria. But we, as reviewers, we were looking at whether that, if the checklist was submitted, whether it met the criteria or not. Now, counties had to provide us with a description of cultural strategies, including addressing racial and ethnic disparities identified in the submitted data analysis and inclusion practices. We also asked them to answer a question: how will the program provide services that are affirmative and supportive of LGBTQ+ youth? And how the program will provide affirming and supportive services to gender diverse youth. These last three are in alignment with YDC strategic planning, our vision, and our mission. So if you move to the next one, please. Now, for the tribal plans, they're different. The statute requires us to work with tribal governments, which we did. And tribal are just juvenile crime prevention plans. There is no prevention. But the tribal plans are part of the overall prevention efforts within an individual tribe. So with that, we asked them about the local community juvenile justice issues, needs, barriers, and service gaps, which it provided. And we did ask them to show us how JCP plan will coordinate with other tribal prevention efforts. What services programs will be, activities will be funded, whether they will be implementing tribal best practices. Tribal best practices is close to an equivalent of evidence-based practices, but they're based on cultural traditions of the tribes. Who will conduct assessments and reassessment? Who will be entering assessment data, and what numbers of youth to be served are you estimating? The reason we ask this question of the tribes, just to get an overall sense how many kids there might be, since we don't have tribal youth population data. It is not available. Melissa, if you could move on to the next one, please. And this is just very briefly how the review process was held this time. So all 36 JCP county prevention plans were reviewed by YDD staff and Juvenile Justice Committee members using Smartsheet software. I am emphasizing Smartsheet software because all of these plans, the review process, reviewers' comments, they exist in Smartsheets. So if you're ever interested in getting access to them, and I'm asking council members, you're more than welcome. Just let me know and I will invite you to take a closer look at them. All 9 tribal JCP plans have been reviewed by YDD staff, YDC tribal representative, meaning Andy Leonard, and NPC research. And I think I saw Juliet somewhere in the audience. So Juliet has been working with the tribes for, God, I'm not going to say how many years, but quite a few biennial. And she has in-depth knowledge of the tribal prevention efforts. So once the review was completed, the Juvenile Justice Committee met on June 7th, which is just this Monday, for a final review and developed a set of recommendations for the full council's approval. So with that, Melissa, if you could move on to the next one. This is what the committee discussed and the recommendations that they've prepared to share with you. And I know the committee members are online. Molly is traveling in Montana, I understand. So I don't know how much she'll be able to, and I don't know even if she can see anything, probably not. So I'll just read. And after I've read it, I will ask council members who participated in the plan's review to chime in. So the committee recommended that all JCP plans submitted by the 9 federally recognized Indian tribes be approved. The committee, so before I read the next one, we had quite a bit of discussion about whether the plans, the county plans, met racial and ethnic disparities section as they were required to do. And you may recall there was a slide specific to that section of the planning. So each plan was rated, that section was rated, and there were 4 categories. They were exceptional, they were satisfactory, they were ones that needed improvement, and there were those who were unsatisfactory. And Sanjay was the lead on that. And I don't know if Sanjay, if you want to say a few words about it, but overall, her rating was in line with other reviewers as well. So the consensus was reached that that's seems to be the appropriate ranking. So with that said, the counties that with RED section rated as exceptional, and there were 7 of those, will be all recommended for approval. And those who were satisfactory, 6 counties, will be approved as submitted as well. I see Christina has a hand. Christina, do you want to say something?
Yes, Anya, I thought it might be helpful to clarify, or maybe Sanjay. My understanding was Sanjay reviewed the racial and ethnic disparity for the purpose of giving a rating on how each plan addressed racial and ethnic disparities, but didn't she do that with a smaller group of folks who were assisting her?
Each
like Sam Coe and some other folks, I thought.
So everybody who was a reviewer of the plans got an assignment with certain counties to be reviewed. So each one of those who were selected for review had an opportunity to provide input and comments for the plans that were under review. So as an example, since you brought up Sam, so Sam wrote some comments in the plans that he was reviewing, very much in alignment with Sanjay's ranking.
Yeah.
And so did you.
Yeah.
Hi, Anya. This is Sam. Yes, Anya's correct. Like 6 counties were assigned to me, and I read those 6 plans. And when I read those plans, some plans they totally left out the racial and ethnic that section. So I put in comments. I think they should resubmit to address that section and so forth. So that was yeah. So and we discussed that on Monday and whether we should ask them to resubmit or not and so forth. But then it's not. It was not a small group. It was just everyone just reviewed their assigned counties and placed comments on the smart sheet. And then each reviewer placed their comments on the smart sheet and people saw it. Yeah.
Great. Okay. I just wasn't clear whether I knew everybody was assigned a grouping of counties, but I wasn't clear whether or not there had been another kind of subgroup that had specifically looked at the racial and ethnic disparities and cultural appropriateness pieces. I just wanted to clarify that. But yes, you're right. I did put comments related to this, Anya. So if you thought I was totally forgetting my comments, I wasn't. So thanks.
Thank you, Christina, for this question. I see there's a comment from Sanjay offering to clarify the racial and ethnic disparities section review. Sanjay, did you want to say a few words?
Good morning. My name is Sanjay Moore. I'm the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Coordinator for the Youth Development Division. So Christina, I was that subcommittee for the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Review. When we developed the process for the Juvenile Crime Prevention Plan review, I was asked to participate in the process by reviewing the overall plan, but specifically looking at the section Anya noted about racial and ethnic disparities and cultural appropriateness. And so I developed the categories and ratings, which were also in line with the ratings that the overall plan we developed within the Juvenile Crime Prevention Review. And so, as Anya shared, there were the categories of exceptional, satisfactory, needs improvement, and unsatisfactory. And exceptional is just what it implies. The counties who went above and beyond and had very in-depth responses. They provided programmatic processes that were already in place, evaluation. They spoke to it in depth, where it exceeded our expectation of that component of the plan. And it was clear that it was more than just meeting the requirement. And those exceptional counties varied in size and demographic, but that's the exceptional category. Satisfactory is meeting our standard of what we requested. They addressed it. It met our expectation, and in my eyes, as far as disparities, it addressed satisfactorily the issue of trying to incorporate cultural appropriateness into their juvenile crime prevention work. Needs improvement were counties in that section of the submission. They made some statement about racial and ethnic disparities and cultural appropriateness, but there was a clear indication that it was very generic at times, and also that there was not much knowledge or processes in place about racial and ethnic disparities or equity. And they would make statements like, we want to make sure that all youth, and we don't discriminate. And so there was some mention of language under that section. And for the counties that were awarded unsatisfactory, there was no mention, as Sam stated, on some of the county plans. And also, if they did mention it, it was in a manner that did not deem that they were making any concerted effort to address racial and ethnic disparities or equity or cultural appropriateness in a way that would benefit the youth who and their government entity, as far as making sure that they are an equitable organization. And so that's the thought that went into developing those ratings and ultimately the rating themselves. And as was stated, the Juvenile Justice Committee members who had their own cohort of counties to review, some of them were able to see those same patterns of submission reflected in those plans.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. Anybody else who participated in the review would like to say a few words?
Hi, Anya.
Yeah,
it's
this is
Parasa. Oh,
no, go ahead.
oh, thank you. Okay. This is Parasa. Thank you again. I wanted to give a shout out to the team. So Sanji, Anya, and Ryan for keeping us organized. The Smart Sheets tool was really helpful. And then in addition to the county applications we were reviewing ourselves, we could have an opportunity to review others and just kind of cross compare. And I thought that that was really valuable to have that opportunity as a committee member. And I would add, our discussion on Monday was really robust in talking about how do we ensure for one, folks who were marked as unsatisfactory or needs improvements with racial and ethnic disparities, how do we provide opportunities for improvement in a way that's supportive and that's not punitive? And so we spent a lot of our discussion on thinking about technical assistance and training and ensuring that that's high quality and focused on ensuring that we're wanting to have the intended impact of eliminating racial disparities and serving our youth, especially our youth of color, right? The other thing that was mentioned on Monday, and I think it's helpful for the full council to be aware of, is I think there was a recommendation from one of our committee members about giving an opportunity when it makes sense to invite county plans that were marked as exceptional and satisfactory with those who needed improvement in particular areas. So not only could you share across your region, but you could also look at best practices across the state. So just thinking about those two things of building that capacity of our counties that may not quite have made the mark, but need some additional support. How do we as the council and the youth development division provide that support? And then the other thing we talked about was ensuring that this work isn't stagnant and that we're holding ourselves accountable to the counties that we are providing grants for. So we set the deadline for the conditional improvement and the provisional component too, so that we're also holding ourselves accountable to counties. And then there's also a clear point at which counties would complete that technical assistance and training.
Thank you, Parasa. Judge, did you say a few words? Since you were to the motion, you passed that motion and you said that and the language and the timelines.
So I wanted to just address that. I think we tried to use this as an opportunity for improvement rather than punishment with respect to the lower two categories. We wanted to treat everybody with grace, but also be intentional about the need for improvement. So with respect to the unsatisfactory, please notice the differences between unsatisfactory and needs improvement. The unsatisfactory, it is provisional approval, not conditional approval. Provision something that exists for the present, possibly to be changed later. And combined with that, the unsatisfactory counties have to really perform by the end of this year. The conditionally approved counties, that is those with needs improvement ratings, have to perform these conditions, but they're not at risk of having to essentially give back the grant if they don't perform to our expectations, and they have a whole year to engage in the improvement, whatever we decide to improvement. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood the difference and give you an opportunity to ask questions if you had any.
Thank you, Judge. Christina, do you have anything else?
Actually, Parasa said almost everything I planned on saying, so really articulate. The work that the YDD staff did, I really want to thank them. They made this so much more streamlined, and the smart sheet that Ryan set up for us was really super helpful and efficient. I've been involved in these review processes many times in the past. This really, really went well, and just, I can't stress that enough. One comment I would make, and I raised this a little bit in our juvenile justice meeting on Monday, is I thought that having the sections specifically on the smart sheet where the rating for the exceptional, satisfactory, et cetera, that special attention, I thought that was excellent. But as having the experience of somebody who had to create a plan and go through the process and get community partner input, and reading what you sent out, Anya, telling us what we needed to make sure to cover in our plans, I really think it's important, because in this round, we put a big emphasis in the direction that we needed to have the counties and the tribes talk about, I'm speaking from a county perspective, talk about the services to LGBTQ plus and gender diverse youth, and how we were going to be appropriate and serve those historically underserved populations. So a suggestion for future thought, and I know we have a new biennium, so it's not going to be for a couple of years, but it'll go by fast. I think we need to also have a column where we are specifically looking at how counties responded to those requirements, because I reviewed the 5 I was assigned, and then I looked at several others, although I did not comment. And there were several that didn't even address anything related to LGBTQ and gender diverse youth. And there was one that I reviewed that was a really great plan, but it was 100% silent on that. And I put very specific comments and some ideas for resources in my comments for that plan. So this is an area I'm very passionate about, and I just think I know everybody else on here is as well. I think it's something that we don't want to lose sight of the importance. So I just wanted to make that comment. And I didn't raise my hand beforehand and say, hey, make sure you have a column on the smart sheet. So this is not meant as a criticism of staff. It was a whole new area that we included and focused on. So I just wanted to share that.
Well, appreciate your comment, Christina. So we can easily make that column now. Yeah. Because just because the review is complete doesn't mean that it's ended. And we did have this conversation on Monday. There's a lack of attention to that question, to say the least. So we don't need to wait until the next biennium. We can still assess the training need this time around and offer, in addition to racial and ethnic disparities training and technical assistance, we can also design or support LGBTQ plus services provision training for the field as well.
Great.
Hey, this is Brian. I just want to add a comment and really appreciate the work of the committee, the work of the reviewers, and this point that Christina and others, I think, I imagine that Christina made, and others I see nodding of heads in our meeting, so to speak, and that I can imagine that there is some intersectionality, to use a term that I hope I don't want to pretend like I'm an expert, but the relationship and connection between different identities, whether they be racial, ethnic, language, gender, sexual orientation, and my sense is that there's some overlap, connection, which are intersectionality between all of those, and that our young people who are identify, we know our young people have, as we all do, right, different aspects to our identity, and it is indeed those youth who, based on some of these, I'll say, sort of described as like marginalized identities, often end up in juvenile justice system, foster care system, and I just want to, I guess, put into the room the need to connect the dots around intersectionality, because again, I think with those kids with various identities and then the marginalization that comes with that, those are the kids, those are young people who are deeply at risk. And so perhaps as we go forward, we can think of ways to assess and review around all of these identities. And Christina, I appreciate your point about the LGBTQ plus youth and the need to call that out.
Could I ask another question at this point?
Yeah, that's great.
I was wondering whether there was any sort of call out in the applications, and I feel like I should know this as a county commissioner, but I don't, for youth with developmental disabilities, because one of the things that we're seeing in Benton County is a real increase in youth with developmental disabilities involved in the juvenile justice system. And I don't know whether that's being handled in a very sensitive way, in an informed way across the counties either. And I realize after a while we start separating out lots of different populations, and it gets harder and harder for grantees. But I know this issue has been a real challenging one in Benton County for our staff.
Commissioner, that was not called out specifically in the guidelines. But it may be addressed by the use of the assessment, because each county and tribe are required to use juvenile crime prevention assessment tool once the kids are referred to the program. I'm not sure I'm answering your question though.
Yeah, this has become enough of an issue in Benton County, not only in the juvenile system but also in the adult system. We have some very active community members that work with ARC in disability rights Oregon, and they are working to change the way that we address some of our work with youth and adults that have significant developmental disabilities. So just wondering whether we even have that in our sights. So thank you. Perhaps something to discuss in future.
Yes, Christina.
I just want to be very transparent and say that the comments you just made, Commissioner, are not in our sights enough and to the degree that they should be as a whole in juvenile justice in Oregon and actually nationally. I was recently, Anya, I've got an idea for technical assistance. I was recently involved in a meeting where they had an expert who works in this area, providing some research and information to a group of folks from around the country, and it was really sobering. And that's an area I know in my own county, one of my senior managers, several of you know her, Alice Perry, is very passionate about young people with who are facing different developmental challenges and disabilities and how their needs are being met. So this is something we're really, I'm not going to say that we are advanced in Clackamas County, but it's on our radar, and it's something we're starting to put some intention into trying to figure out how do we better incorporate that, as Brian said, as one of the identities the youth who we're working with might have. So this is a very big deal in juvenile justice, and many of us who work in juvenile justice specifically have seen way too many young people with developmental disabilities who get, for lack of a better option, they get pushed deeper and deeper into the system and sometimes end up being committed to youth correctional facilities that when they shouldn't be. So, and that's my opinion, but I'm glad you brought that up. It's a really important point.
Thank you, Christine. I see the judge. Judge, you have your hand up. Would you like to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate that in my experience on the bench, outdated as it is now, I was concerned greatly about kids who were on the fetal alcohol spectrum, because the disability that you can't see is often the most difficult to deal with. And, you know, we tend to, in juvenile justice, classify children, call the can't, won't, into can't and won't categories. And often a child would actually be unable to do what is demanded of him or her, and not really unwilling, and we misclassify. And so I think that that whole pot of known developmental disabilities, but also unknown. And then, as Brian just said in the chat, I think, you know, ADD and dyslexia, or those are profoundly impactful with respect to learning and falling behind at school. And I'm really glad to hear Christina say that this is, you know, I think that this whole compendium of issues could use improvement, and I'm thrilled to see that Christina believes that we're really focusing on it now. But in my time on the bench, this is again out some years ago, 10 years ago now, I didn't feel, I felt like we were constantly not is that we were dealing with respect to the impediments that made that child unable to meet expectations rather than unwilling.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Judge and Christina. And Sam put a comment in the chat box using ODE data for students with learning disabilities. Sam, did you want to say a few words or just give the comment in writing?
I'm sorry. I'll spell out the acronym. Sorry. ODE stands for Oregon Department of Ed. JDEP stands for Juvenile Detention Education Program. Those are the educational programs in county level detention facilities. And YSEP is Youth Corrections Education Program, that are schools in the OIA closed custody facilities. And IDA eligible are, that stands for special education, students with learning disabilities, and ST stands for school districts. So normally, you know, normal school districts, those are on the higher side, or like 11 to 13%. But students in our county detention facilities and OIA facilities that are special ed eligible are much higher, and they include, you know, ADHD and so forth. But our data show that most of our students are emotionally disturbed or other health impaired. And and since I've been at OD from 2008, there was only one instance where there was a deaf student. I don't remember ever having a blind student in our JDEP or YSAP, because these students come to mind. But then, unfortunately, we have had instances of severely autistic students in our programs, and then but luckily they were quickly transitioned out into our long-term care treatment program. That's the residential programs. So, and then I found generally whether the counties or OIA, once they have students that are severely cognitively disabled, they are transferred out of the closed custody thankfully into a residential setting, because it's just hard for our students that are severely cognitively impaired or severely autistic. I'm thankful for our juvenile justice partners for transitioning them out of there quickly as they become identified. But we do have a disproportionate amount of kids in our juvenile justice systems that are, with special ed needs.
Thank you, Sam. It sounds to me like the Juvenile Justice Committee and the YDG staff have some work to do in designing technical assistance and training supports moving forward. That would include looking at the needs of the whole youth, whatever their challenges might be.
Hey, Anya, real quickly, this is Brian, and I know we want to keep things moving and just appreciate the conversation. One of the things that I'm going to note in the director's report, which is going to come later, but it just feels like it's important to note now, is that we're working on, as a part of the recruitment to replace some of our council members who are turning off, more people with lived experience, particularly young people who've had, either direct or just sort of relevant experience with our systems. And so we will be making we're making an effort to add more of those voices to this conversation going forward. But I guess I feel like if either of our youth committee members or youth committee member representatives have any, thoughts or ideas, I just wanted to, make space for any youth voice in this part of the conversation, which I think is a real priority for us, and we'll add some more voices here as soon as we can. But just again, wanted to open that space if any youth committee members have anything to add. No pressure if you don't. Just saying it. Anya, you can keep moving.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Looks like Judge
Anya, I'd like to just make a really brief comment. This is a great project. I'm really impressed with the work that's being done and support the comments that others have made. I also support that there not be a punitive approach to addressing the challenges by these counties. But I'm so discouraged that after the decades of conversation we've had about these kids, that 64% of the counties are not even meeting baseline. So I'm hoping that in your planning going forward on what you're going to try and do to provide technical support, that it includes accountability, and that we maybe take a little more creative look or harder look at how we can use technical assistance and support to bring these guys up to baseline. It's just not, I'm just shocked at how poorly we're still how we're not addressing the kids that we really need to be.
Thank you, Janet.
Janet, I would just like to, I was going to type it in, but I will say I'm overwhelmed with appreciation for your comment, because if the Juvenile Justice Committee members recall, in the meeting, I did express that same statistic that 64% of the counties out of 36, as it relates to racial and ethnic disparities in particular, I know that we have a lot of room for improvement to look more specifically at the underrepresented communities that have been discussed, the LGBTQIA+ community, disabilities, the whole youth. But as it relates to racial and ethnic disparities, there is a lot of opportunity for growth. But Janet, I wholeheartedly agree with you that there at some point has to be some level of accountability and responsibility, because this conversation about racial equity and justice and these statistics are not new. And a lot of the conversation in counties where there was more of a homogeneous population and not a diverse population is that we can't really address this because we're all white. But what if that changes? But isn't there still a responsibility on your entity as a municipality, a government entity, to be up to speed and educated and informed on these matters, because you represent the people, and your population, your constituency could easily shift in dynamic, which we have seen in this country over the last decades. There's been a tremendous shift in the population dynamic with people of color and underrepresented communities in this country. And so also, I had the opportunity to meet with Juliet of MPC Research yesterday afternoon to kind of frame what this training or technical assistance may look like, because for the unsatisfactory counties, we have until December to try to work with them to correct their plan. And so the hope is that as we move forward in this, we can have some standard offering to counties, but also make sure that they're individualized and taking into consideration all the unique needs of a county and a region and a demographic. So, and providing options. I think that was another conversation that came up in the meeting, is that there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to how to help the counties address these deficiencies in grace, but with intentionality. And so making sure that we develop options, including possibly pairing up counties, if they're open to it, with the counties who are doing well, who are making strides, for them to be some kind of cross mentoring type of education, if that's something that they're open to. But we do have a lot of work to do across the spectrum, and I appreciate the intentionality and the determined manner, in which the Juvenile Justice Committee made a very bold move in these recommendations as far as this juvenile crime prevention grant awards.
Thank you, Sanji. I like your response. It makes me feel a little bit more hopeful. I might push a little bit more and say that if you think that one of the better technical assistance strategies that you can deliver is that they are required to participate with the 7 counties who came out exceptional, so they could find out what their culture is and how they do the work and why they found the priorities in place that they have. I wouldn't shy away from requiring specific kinds of participation in the future. And for staff, I'd like you to send out the list of the counties, which counties were in which categories, so we had a sense of maybe there's some other characteristics for those counties that we could be aware of, whether it's rural or urban or other demographics that could be of some assistance to us.
I would like to second that request. And I also want to caution that if you require the other counties to learn from those exceptional counties, it might put a lot of pressure on the staff from those counties, and to acknowledge that, because it takes time, and some of those juvenile departments won't have the time and staffing to be able to just provide that much counsel to others. So just need to acknowledge that.
Christina?
I'm the person who actually threw out the idea of having the counties who had a exceptional rating try to assist their colleagues in other counties who might be struggling. And my actual idea that I put out was, I think a starting place would be to provide, as the judge said, coming at this from a punishment stance isn't going to help us move the dial. And really, at the end of the day, we want to improve outcomes and experiences and affirmation and support for these historically underserved young people. So my idea was really to have as a starting place a safe space where we could have a meeting, invite the folks, the counties that were struggling, invite the counties that were exceptional, and even those counties that were exceptional, and Sanjay, I know you'd agree, we all have work to do. This is never going to be, this is a journey. This is never going to be a destination. So my idea was to, as a starting place, have a meeting where maybe the exceptional counties or the exceptionally rated counties could present some information about their struggles, the strategies they used, where they've had successes, and where they're still trying to gain improvement. So share that, and then answer questions from the counties, or bring up some of the, let them bring up some of the concerns and their struggles. The point that I made is that every county, and somebody just already touched on this, counties have different resources. If Molly was here, I know she would be saying this. Some of those frontier counties that don't have providers or access to even bringing a youth, or letting a youth engage in services because there's no one there with the specialized services that are needed. It's a really complex problem. So I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses for anybody, because we all have to do better. But I think the starting place is to bring people together and find out what some of the needs are. And then if we're all in the same room, it might be that a struggling county can reach out to 2 or 3 other counties that aren't struggling because they have pieces of expertise in the areas that they need help in. So that was really what I was envisioning when I threw that out. I think what you said, Commissioner, about I can't donate all of my staff in Clackamas County to do this full time, obviously, right? Because we have our own water to carry here. We have to improve a lot of things. So, but I do care and want to be a support, because other counties have extended that to Clackamas over the years. We're all in this together. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify what my specific idea was on Monday. So.
Thank you, Christina. And Celeste, I don't know if this would be a good time to entertain a motion regarding the plan's approval, or should we have a quick conversation about the minimum grant allocation and then
Great question. In the interest of time, it saves us time if we take one motion rather than 2. I don't know if that will be possible, but if we could have a conversation about the minimum grant allocation, and we may have the council determine just to do one motion to approve everything. So let's go ahead and talk about that first.
Thank you, Celeste. So currently the minimum grant allocation for the current biennium is $60,000 for minimum grant counties and all 9 tribes. And that's based on our overall JCP budget. We anticipate, again, pending legislative approval, that JCP budget will go slightly up for the next biennium. And I think Court might still be on the line. Court helped us do some calculations. And when the premises, we use the expected allocation for the 21-23 biennium, and also realigned with the youth population data that Oregon Youth Authority uses, which is an estimate based on last census data that we get from PSU, Portland State University. So with that said, if everything goes as we envision, meaning the legislature will approve the allocation that we're anticipating, everybody would get an increase, every county and every tribe. It will vary slightly between counties because there's only one outlier as far as I remember. One county will get a larger hike than others just because their youth population has grown significantly over the last few years. But all things considered, we could anticipate that we'll have enough funding available to increase the minimum grant to $63,000 per biennium, which is a 5% increase. That's the basic thinking and calculation behind the $63,000 allocation for as a minimum grant.
Great, thank you, Anya. I also just want to send appreciation to council members who participated in this process. As a council member who is not participating, it helps me so much more understand the process. It helps me understand the conversations to have each of you share your story and help us understand how this is such a council committee recommendation that has really gone through a vetted process. So with that being said, we've discussed a lot of elements of this. We have some potential motions that we could make. I'd like to ask the council for a motion, and I'm curious, do we have a motion?
For the motion, Celeste, this is Liz. I have a question, just very definition on the recommendations. Anya, can you share, anybody on the committee, so the third one down, for those who were rated as needs improvement for conditional approval, and then those who were rated as unsatisfactory for provisional approval. Is there a functional difference between provisional and conditional in those two recommendations?
There is, and I will refer to the judge to clarify that.
Okay.
Conditional means that you have to engage in the activities that we suggest to you, but you don't risk having your grant money taken away. Provisional means this is temporary and it could change.
That's helpful.
Meaning that if you don't get your act together by December, then you risk having to give your money back. So there are more teeth in a provisional grant than there is in a conditional grant.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Okay, council members, do I have a motion?
Well, I'll move. This is Pamela Abernethy. I move that the council accept the 5 recommendations that are set out on the slide before us.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
This is Liz. I can second.
Okay, wonderful. So we have a motion on the floor right now to approve the 5 recommendations that we see listed on this slide, and we have a second. Do we have any discussion on the motion as it exists?
I have one question for clarification, given the provisional category. Does the Youth Development Division have the authority to deny an allocation, or would a county still eventually receive the minimum allocation of 63,000?
So I believe we do. Each county and each tribe are eligible for an allocation, but it's not guaranteed because the grant is conditional on approval of the plan. So since we're giving a provisional approval, just as Judge said, we reserve the right to terminate the funding unless improvement are made as expected.
Thank you for that clarification. Any additional questions or comments? Okay, in that case, let's go ahead and do the roll call. Melissa, are you ready?
I am. Thanks, Celeste. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Pamela Abernethy.
Agree. Aye.
Janet Ahrens.
Aye.
Jaime Arredondo. Zan Ojiro.
Aye.
Aisha Berry.
Aye.
Eric Cardella.
Yes.
Parasa Chanrami.
Aye.
Alicia Hayes.
Aye.
Janine Hartley. Celeste Jansen.
Yes.
Maricela Ortega Guzman.
Yes.
Andy Leonard.
Yes.
Tabidi Lewis. Adrian Livingston.
Yes.
Christina McMahon.
Yes.
Destiny Ortiz. Jeff Parker. Molly Rogers. Diana Rojas. Karen Spencer.
Aye.
Liz Thorne.
Yes.
Koi Vu.
Aye.
And I see Diana, you chimed in on the chat. Thank you so much.
Okay, Melissa, while you count that up, I think we have quorum and it sounded like that motion passed. I would like to, at a later council meeting, have conversation about the counties who are under provisional approval if they don't do the minimum requirement in order to move into more conditional approval, what we can do to intentionally support still having services or supporting those counties. I'm thinking about if I were in a frontier county and that minimum allocation we didn't receive because the county didn't do anything, if there is a way in which the council could support a provider in helping to do services, or if we can still try to come up with a regional or local solution to help this still happen. So if we can have a conversation at a later date, and of course, I don't know what we are allowed to do or not allowed to do. So that's a question I'd like to ask the division staff for making a determination. It might be that those resources just need to go back into the pool, but I'd love if we could try to make sure that we keep money in a county that or in an area so that the youth in that area are we're working towards where we'd like to go in the long run.
And Celeste, I would just like to insert that from my standpoint, and I'm sure that of the Juvenile Justice Committee and Anya and Brian, we will make every over and above effort to work with a county that needs improvement or that is currently unsatisfactory, to meet them where they are and to help them try to get to a level of growth. So there will be infinite opportunities between the allotted time for a county to just say, I'm open to receiving help and to implementing something or to revising how we our practice and our policy. And so I hope everyone keeps that in mind, that this is not iron fisted. There's the opportunity that will be presented to work with people who are willing and open to being worked with.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I got a little thing with the tribal 9 tribes. This kind of a thing that I'm the director or the thing for JCP here in Warm Springs. So what we do is pretty much what is needed in our community, especially on a reservation. I could say that differently from all the other counties. The 9 recognized tribes also put in their own thing for the grant too. So what we do is we always look into in our communities what we need within the kids in our systems, and there's actually a lot of kids that we take care of through behavioral health, CPS, Children's Protective Service, and then we always see them in the school, Jefferson County School District. So we always go after that, and you know, we always look at kids that are referred to within our program, within the system all the time. And I'm pretty sure within the 9 tribes, I think that's everybody. And what we do is like look for early signs of substance abuse, family problems in the community, schools, peer and behavioral problems, pretty much. A lot of our 9 tribes programs always includes cultural activities within their tribe. And depending on, because all 9 tribes are all different. So, and then we're all not like, you know, have the same amount of Native Americans in each one of our tribes. So it varies. A lot of them do a lot of social media, a lot of information within the school and within their, if they have radio or paper or whatever they do. Like I do prevention classes within our school district. Prevention classes for the kids. And then I also see some of my clients, JCP clients, in their school to kind of check up on them and do programs with them. We have a Native Aspiration Prevention Coalition, and it's within our county, Jefferson County. We have representatives from different prevention coordinators, I guess you could say that, that come together once a month, and we always plan within our county. It's not our reservation, but our county, different programs that we provide, you know, for kids to do. We have a Warm Springs prevention program. We have aftercare, tobacco prevention, suicide prevention, and underage drinking prevention. So those are some of the things that we do at Warm Springs for the JCP. So it's kind of information that I want to give out to you guys, kind of, because we haven't really talked about the 9 tribes. So kind of information that I like to let you guys know about. So I'm good.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm grateful that you're sharing that experience to help us understand more about what's happening in Warm Springs.
Yeah, we're actually doing a suicide, or not a suicide, but a grieving conference right now at the moment. So it's for a community, and what we're doing is the grieving process of losing. We lost like maybe 40 tribal members this year for COVID. So what they're doing now is kind of doing a thing for them right now. So the next 2 days we're doing a grieving conference. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we just did a lot of work. Thank you all for listening, participating, sharing. I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate where we're moving. This is the role of the council. We want to have a director's report, committee reports, and public comment. So instead of a 10-minute break, I'd like to ask that we have a 5-minute break instead. Anya, is there any last item that you need to share before we go into break? I should have asked you that first.
No, Celeste, this is the time to discuss the police.
Oh, okay.
Policy, or would that be under the committee report? What's your sense?
Yeah, I don't know. Brian, what were you anticipating? When should we talk about that?
Yeah, I think we were going to do that as a part of this part of the conversation, since I know we're still working with, I think, a good quorum, and I don't want to lose that.
Okay, let's do that, and then we'll do the break right after.
Forward and then do the break.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Celeste. So Melissa, would you mind putting up the school police? So I'll already be brief. You all received a copy of a draft policy that will be voted on by the Council of SAGs tomorrow at the Coalition for Juvenile Justice Conference. Melissa, do you mind moving the slide, please? So in a nutshell, this is the background information. Half a year ago, in November 2020, the Coalition for Juvenile Justice adopted the policy platform, which identified racial and ethnic disparities and offered policy and funding strategies to address them. One section of the platform did not pass and was sent back for revisions. So the whole committee was created to revise the policy recommendations related to police and schools. 2 listening sessions were held with young people and their input was incorporated. And I believe Sanjay participated in the work of that committee as well. So the draft that we're discussing today will be voted on by the council tomorrow. And Molly, who has been designated as the YDC representative, will be casting her vote on your behalf. So we felt it was important for you to have a educated sort of opinion on what that policy is. Melissa, would you mind moving on, please? So the key points are following. So the CJJ is committed to taking a firm stance to boldly addressing racism within the youth justice system, and is asking members to commit to schools as places of learning, which are welcoming to Black, Indigenous, and Latino students and families, and designed for student success. So with that, there are 4 areas.
Somebody sounds like they're unmuted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian. I wasn't sure if I'm hearing voices. The CJG recommendations are organized in 4 key areas. 1 is to commit to schools as places of learning, welcoming to Black, Indigenous, and Latino students and families, and designed for student success. I just cannot emphasize that enough. 2nd, to incentivize the discrimination of routine youth behaviors, which are disproportionately criminalized for youth of color. 3rd, ensure accountability for schools and their impact on racial and ethnic disparities within the juvenile justice system. And 4th, ensure that all students within a given school district have equal access to programs and opportunities. Melissa, would you mind moving the slide? So with that, there are 2 areas within those 4 recommendations. 1 section is specific recommendations for police and schools, and then they read as following. Law enforcement personnel or other personnel with the authority to effectuate arrest should be present in the school only upon a demonstrated threat to the immediate safety of students, staff, or faculty, and then only as long as the threat exists. 2nd, to ensure regulation and accountability for districts that have law enforcement in schools to avoid justice by geography, by including training and technical support to help address challenges and needs of schools that have been shown to disproportionately refer youth of color to the courts. Third, develop best practices to ensure arrests are not made in schools for disciplinary infractions and young people are handcuffed and/or arrested on school grounds only as a last resort in situations of extreme emergency. And lastly, schools should be diligent in assessing whether the perception of threat itself is motivated by racial bias. And the next slide, please, Melissa. And these are recommendations specific for schools. So the school should prioritize recruitment of teachers from diverse backgrounds, including those who are graduates of historically Black colleges and universities. Schools should be diligent in assessing whether the perception of threat itself is motivated by racial bias. Schools should ensure that school discipline remains in the school's hands and the low-level offenses committed on school grounds during school operating hours are removed from juvenile court jurisdiction entirely. And last recommendation is to recommend financial incentives for schools that use restorative practices and truth and reconciliation practices instead of arrest and court referrals. So these are the main points of the draft policy that we shared with you all. And this will be voted for acceptance or not by the Coalition for Juvenile Justice Council of SAGs tomorrow.
Anya, there's a question in chat from Koi Vu. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. So I'm just looking at the first page, and this is also something that's not the first time that the state has put out something, and they forget to add Asians and Pacific Islander into the list of communities, racial communities. So I just want to point out that in the first page, we identify that it should be a safe place for our Black, Indigenous, Latino community. I noticed that we took out communities of color because we were more specific, but then oftentimes, as I've seen in state documentations, that folks are forgetting Asians and Pacific Islander in this list as well.
Thank you, Koi. Melissa, could you move to the first for the, I think it's second.
And Anya, I would also like to insert for Koi, I appreciate your comment. I inserted in the chat like direct language from the platform. And again, we are supporting the Coalition for Juvenile Justice. And this is a platform that is a part of a group of state advisory groups across the country. And so they do specifically state people of color as well as LGBTQA youth and youth with disabilities. So we have the opportunity to learn from them with our previous conversation. But I think these specific recommendations are based on data and the most intense disparities that exist. And those tend to exist for Black, Indigenous, and Latinx youth. And so not excluding any other underrepresented group or people of color, they're basing this off of data that specifically shows that these particular groups are the ones that are repeatedly and most disparately impacted by school resource officers. I hope that provides some level of clarification.
Thank you, Sanjay. I think Adrian has a question too, at least I see a hand raised.
Yes, so definitely read the report. Thanks for sending that. And I do like seeing the focus, especially with counselors, that the line to ensure that federal funding for counselors and therapists is at a minimum equal to the school that receives, what the school receives for law enforcement. And so I just know because of having the policing of students of color, specifically Black, Indigenous populations, and especially also with the pandemic, that mental health, maybe this is something that can't be changed now, but I just wanted to let you know, at least my perspective, would love to see that being more funding at a level more than what has been provided for law enforcement, because I think there's just so much correction that we have to make in schools when it comes to what has been done because of policing and the trauma caused by that. But then there are just so many more issues. So would love to see that be more, funding than what has been provided for law enforcement. Just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, Adrian.
Anya, just for a point of clarification, so are we at this point authorizing Molly to vote on our behalf? Is that essentially what the vote that you're asking for is? Sorry.
Correct.
Okay. Is Molly here too? I don't see her, but.
She's driving in Montana.
Okay, all right. I know what that's like. That means she'll likely not be able to participate. Okay, well that's fine. I know that we will pass this information on to her.
Yeah, and Celeste, I appreciate your question, and Anya and I have discussed this, and I imagine this came up at the Juvenile Justice Committee probably Monday. I mean, this is the kind of area that given our role as a state advisory group and our membership in the Coalition for Juvenile Justice at a national level, it was important to me that we be as transparent and as communicative as possible about, these kinds of the role that we play and the responsibility that we have, and frankly, was thinking with Anya about, okay, so if we're going to have Molly representing our state advisory group and essentially our council in a voting role, it felt like we should, as a council, have this conversation. And it does, again, feel appropriate to have a vote in order to, fully, I don't know, to allow for Molly to carry forward. And I also think this represents like an important point. I don't know if it's like a tipping point or an inflection point, or who knows what the right word is. Like, as a council, it's us kind of putting our voice out there in some really intentional ways. So while both exciting and perhaps with the point that Coy is making and the very real impacts that we're seeing in communities across the country related to discrimination and racism experienced by our Asian and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters. There's discomfort, right? There's imperfection. This is not the way this stuff is written and playing out, to Sanji's point, is based on real data. And yet at the same time, I can understand there's some tension there. So I'm just calling it out. And yet I think this is an opportunity and an important role for the council to be both discussing and making some decisions around, so that as we step out into more policy work, strategic work, that we understand how we do that, and that our voice really matters.
Thank you, Brian. As chair, I've attended a CJJ conference. There's usually one every year. And for me, it was very eye-opening to see the ways that different state advisory groups, or SAGs, are constructed in different states. Because in other states, state advisory groups are often focused solely on these types of policy conversations. They are places where there is intense conversation, perhaps with DAs, with judges, with police, to have these types of reform conversations. So, and they don't have resources often to focus on prevention. So how we have constructed the YDC to be both the YDC and the SAG is very different among other states. And I agree, I think this is the type of conversation that we have really not engaged in as much at a council level. And yet really to do the work effectively for the SAG to think about these types of policy recommendations and to begin to move the council in that direction, I think it's a really good practice. So thank you for bringing this to us. It makes a lot of sense that Molly hears our recommendations and carries our voice forward. In the interest of time, I'd love to find out if there is any other last quick questions or comments, but I'd love to entertain a vote so that we can also focus on some of the other important items on our agenda. Any last questions or comments?
So I would just like to say to Coy, I think that's the purpose of this conversation, to get a collective voice as a Youth Development Council so that Molly, when she's representing the Oregon Youth Development Council, she can take some of these concerns back to the state advisory group. So I hope that Molly will be able to get the information and your question, Coy, so that she can share it with the state advisory, the Council of State Advisory Groups tomorrow, in saying, should we update the language that's currently in the platform to include Asian and Pacific Islanders specifically, expressly in the writing language. So I hope that that will get back to Molly and that she can possibly bring that up tomorrow.
So much, Sonia, for that. So, you know, I think one of the things also that I struggle with too is that our API population is very, very big and very high and very diverse. And I don't know if the data for a Pacific Islander actually represents the same way with our Asian population, as we do know that there's, you know, that there's a lot of needs in our communities. And so having more inclusive languages as far as being safe spaces for all of our communities and communities of color, and especially our most impacted communities, is important, especially in this document that is so important for all of us.
Celeste, I have a clarifying question.
Yeah.
On the slide that we're looking at, the middle bullet, school police section of the platform was not adopted and required revisions. So I'm not clear as to what pieces of the document that we were sent to us, that was sent to us, are not part of what we're voting on. So I don't feel comfortable voting till I'm clear on that. What does that mean specifically for the document that we're voting on? What does that mean, that even though it's listed here, it's not really being voted on tomorrow at the national meeting? So I'm a little confused.
So the document that was shared with you has tracked changes. So what is being voted on is the changes that were proposed to the document.
So to me, it looks like there is still language about school police in here. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that PowerPoint that was shared with you, that was our attempt to simplify
and
outline the recommendations.
Right. I raised at the Juvenile Justice Committee, when we spoke about this on Monday, I raised a question about what the status of Chief Teague was and what the status of bringing new law enforcement representatives in. I felt uncomfortable. You know, there's a lot of controversy and conflict and concern about police interactions with young people. And I've heard both sides of that. And I felt concerned with trying to take a position when we had no law enforcement voice from this council at the table to share their perspective. So I'm gonna reiterate what I said on Monday at the Juvenile Justice Committee.
Alicia, did you have a comment as well?
Yeah, just a quick comment, which is, you know, we are dealing with, and it's not maybe the YDC, but when you do remove police from your school district, you're still dealing with a another entity in terms of the police force and their willingness or not willingness to show up because they aren't in the schools now for a lockdown or something like that. So I just think as community members, we need to hold that entity accountable, because the backlash for districts definitely can be seen. And I don't know if I'm making that clear in a way that isn't accusatory, but it's very hard to watch having to borrow officers from another school district because officers won't show up for your lockdowns because you've removed them from the schools. So I think just as community members and the YDC, we should be looking at ways to support our schools who have made this a really important and I believe correct choice to remove officers from the schools. Thanks.
Anya, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Celeste. I just want to add a couple quick thoughts. So complementary to some of this work happening at the federal level, I wonder if there's an opportunity for our council to collaborate with the Governor's Racial Justice Council and others in describing what this looks like in Oregon. And I know Reimagine Oregon and a number of community groups have been doing some incredible work and visioning around this. So I'm thinking there's a real opportunity here for partnership. So this is not necessarily, I don't know if it's relevant to those federal level conversations, but I'm just thinking in our context, as we have conversations about what this looks like in practice and what supports our local communities need to do this work and ensure that our youth and our kids are safe and in welcoming environments where they're affirmed and supported. I just wanted to offer that food for thought of like, this work doesn't end here, it really continues, and the opportunity for some action planning around this.
And I would just like to insert in supporting the policy platform. If we vote yes and it passes, we're saying that when these recommendations are fine-tuned and shared across the country, that we would be willing to try to implement those in our policy direction in Oregon. And so if we vote no, we're saying that the recommendations, if this platform passes as a whole, are not tailored to the state of Oregon. And so I think keeping that in mind, that if this passes, we are keeping the recommendations to the heart of our policy planning moving forward, which overall is to adjust the way that school resource officers look right now, because they disproportionately affect underrepresented communities. And we need to revise and train and update this and take some of the money that's being used for school resource officers, and as Adrian was stating, put it into mental health services for students. So keeping in mind, we're supporting a national platform that we can bring back to Oregon and tailor to our community. Or we're not supporting it and saying if there's too much disapproval and the majority feels school resource officers need to stay, then that means the way it looks in Oregon will be different than our partner organizations across the country.
All right, we don't yet have a motion on the table, and I would like to make one because I think that's a really important next step. Do I have a motion from the council?
I would move approval that Molly Rogers be empowered to go to the Council of State Advisory Groups and to vote on our behalf in support of a policy on policing in schools. Ojiro.
I second that motion.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table to approve the changes as we've seen, and a second. Any additional questions or comments for the motion on the table? All right, in that case, let's go ahead and hold a roll call vote. Melissa, are you ready?
I am. Thanks, Celeste. Pamela Abernethy.
Aye.
Janet Ahrens. Jaime Arredondo. Zan Ojero.
Aye.
Aisha Tuberry.
Yes.
Eric Cardella.
Yes.
Parasa Chanrami.
Aye.
Alicia Hayes.
Aye.
Janine Hartley.
Aye.
Celeste Jansen.
Aye.
Maricela Ortega Guzman.
Aye.
Andy Leonard.
Aye.
Tabidi Lewis. Adrienne Livingston.
Yes.
Christina McMahon.
Abstain.
Destiny Ortiz. Jeff Parker. Molly Rogers. Diana Rojas. Got it in the chat. Thanks, Diana. Karen Spencer. John Teague. Liz Thorne.
Yes.
Koi Vu.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to check in. Thank you all for this conversation. Also, I'd love to make sure that as we communicate to Molly the fact that this passed, I'd also love if we can communicate some of the richness of our conversation as well, so that she's able to really engage in an informed conversation that that the council has today represented with multiple views and points that we've made throughout this last half hour. Brian, I'm looking to you. Should we go ahead and do our 5-minute break right now? I want to make sure we have enough time for everything on the agenda.
Yeah, I feel like we could literally 5 minutes. I will make my report. I'll try to keep it quick and know that I sent it around right about a month ago. There are a couple of sort of additions and updates, but I think we can get through it pretty quickly.
Great. Okay. So if we could take 5 minutes starting right now, if you could return to your desk in approximately 4 so we can begin right at 5, that would be great. It's 11:11 in my computer, so we'll begin around 11:16. Thanks, everyone. All right, council members, if you could return to your computers, we need to begin the last two portions or three portions of the agenda. Just as a reminder, we did not do the director's report at 8:40, and so we are going to do that director's report now, followed by the committee reports, and then finally followed by public comment. So Brian, do you want to go ahead and take it away and begin your director's report?
I will. Thanks everybody for the discussion over the course of the morning and the votes. And I just wanted to take a little time to kind of share kind of where some things are. As I said, I wrote kind of a long report and shared it out. It feels like it was 3 or 4 weeks ago. So you're welcome to refer to that. I didn't put together like a PowerPoint, and I'm not going to share my screen, but I am looking at the report that I did share with you all, and we'll just kind of highlight in each of the sections a few key points. And then I have added a couple of things that I didn't include in the report because obviously it's been a few weeks, and there are a couple of things that I felt like warranted some update. So just want to thank everyone for the conversation at the beginning of today's meeting around the RFA. We're excited to now have that vote and be able to move forward. Feel real good about the direction we're headed. So exciting about that's, and again, I'm excited and thankful for the work of the staff and of the council. As it relates to the funding requests for applications, which are now out and available to grantees and community organizations across the state. We're really excited about both the different community investment grant opportunities and the Reengagement Opportunity Grant. As Cord noted, that we did do public sessions to gather input and answer some questions prior to the release of the RFA. We did about 5 of those. A few hundred people were registered and attended those conversations. So we did some work in advance of the release to get the word out and make sure that people were aware of the important opportunities for grants in this coming biennium. So really appreciate the staff and the work that they did to organize those public sessions, including 2 which were specifically for federally recognized tribes. Some changes that I think are important to note in the RFAs, and I know that Cord and other grant managers are on the line so they can help clarify any of these things, but we did include in the RFAs that federally negotiated indirect rates that exceed the YDD standard administrative percentage will be accepted. So that was some feedback, based on some feedback that we got, that negotiating a higher indirect rate is possible. There's a score multiplier for grant applications from federally recognized tribes. So know that's also a key piece of the evaluation. Grantees also will have the option to have costs reimbursed on a more frequent basis as a monthly at a minimum monthly, but also they can stay with the quarterly reimbursement. But know too that we've got feedback, and I think in our March conversation there was questions about the reimbursement and the quarterly reimbursement, essentially requiring grantees to do work and then have to wait 3 months to be reimbursed for those costs. We are now going to allow them to be reimbursed on a monthly basis if that is their desire. And then organizations can also do monthly and quarterly. They can kind of do a mix based on what their needs are financially. Cord mentioned the regional approach where we're looking to award the highest scoring grant award in regions across the state so that we can get some broader geographic representation. And so those are some key pieces that we're working on. There's some conversation too going on around sovereign immunity with tribes, which we can provide a deeper update about that later. But that's an ongoing question that we've heard from tribes around the waiver that has in the past been required that tribes waive their sovereign immunity. So we're looking into that issue. So that's a bit about the RFA. Legislative priorities. Our bills are passing and moving forward. One of our bills is the House Bill 2051, which is clarifying eligibility for reengagement programs. I believe that's passed. And our other bill, Senate Bill 54, which is the bill that's clarifying roles between the Youth Development Council and Oregon Youth Authority. I believe that's also passed and moving. So our two primary bills are moving forward. And also there's a larger bill around the Oregon Department of Education funding for the Student Success Act that we're also monitoring. And I don't know if there's a specific update around that, but I know that the general positive state revenue forecast means that I think that we're anticipating hearing any day that our YDD budget, the overall Oregon Department of Education budget, and even the Student Success Act budget, I think we should be hearing any day about those being approved by the legislature. And again, given the overall revenue forecast, we're optimistic. So that's a little bit about legislative priorities. I included in my update that we're tracking a number of other bills. You can refer to the update to kind of see what we're tracking, one of which is a racial equity and justice student collaborative bill. I know Parsa and her organization have been working on that, so we're excited to have been a part of some conversations there. Ballot Measure 110 and the implementation work group there that Molly Rogers is a part of, as is Sanji Moore from our office. So we're tracking that bill. And then again, there are several others that I've noted in my update. I'll take a pause. I see, are there any like sort of legislative priorities or budget questions that folks have? Not seeing any hands going up, not seeing any. I'm just going to keep us moving so we can get on to our committee reports. As it relates to Youth Development Council membership and recruitment, an ongoing issue. I know we've got folks who are terming off and who are still on. I said, hey, keep serving until we actually have appointed new members. And so appreciate several of you who are sticking it out. And although I know Chief Teague wasn't able to join us for this meeting, we've certainly been in communication and with him and having some ongoing conversations. So the bottom line is that I've been working on a group of, I'd say probably 3 to 6 people who are all interested in joining the council. And by the end of this month, my goal is to ensure that those folks get their applications in. And then what I have been in discussions with the governor's office is that they would then in July look at all those applications. Might be 3 or 4 people, but it could be 6 or 7 too, right? I got to actually see who gets their applications in. And then the governor's office would ultimately in July be looking to kind of approve a group of new folks. So we're a bit at the mercy of that timeline, but know that I've had some really good conversations with folks from different parts of the state who are passionate about young people, interested in youth development issues, juvenile justice issues. I've even invited some of those folks to be guests on today's YDC meeting so that they're able to listen in. As I mentioned earlier, we've got some youth folks in particular who are also looking at, some of whom are actually youth who are who have direct experience in the Oregon Youth Authority system and actually are in custody as potential members. So good conversations happening. I don't want to like get too far out ahead, and I'm not going to mention any specific names, but the conversations are going, and I hope, you know, midsummer we should be able to get some new folks named, and then into the fall start bringing those folks on board. Any questions or comments there? Melissa's been working hard to help with that process and getting people links to applications and information as required, and so been working hard on that. You know, I think we've covered a fair amount around juvenile justice, crime prevention, around racial. We didn't speak a lot about racial and ethnic disparities data. I know Sanji put together a really strong presentation for the Juvenile Justice Committee and put together both a set of data and some recommendations. I've included some of that information in my director's report. You know, this is not a surprise, I think, to anyone, but in the data that we looked back on from 2019, there are still persisting disparities, particularly for African-American youth, Latino youth in some specific cases, and but then African-American and Native American youth are, there's some specific disparities here in the state that we continue to keep our eye on. And I think that work that the Juvenile Justice Committee is doing to really look at how JCP plans are moving is going to be really instrumental in trying to reverse some of those data points. So look more to my report for some of the more specific data, and know that the Juvenile Justice Committee has like the full report. We can share that also information as well. It's probably available on our website since we're posting all of the committee notes and attachments. So you're welcome to check out that information there. Know that facilities inspections are starting to kick up. This was not included in my report from a few weeks ago, but wanted to note for folks, and I know Ryan is on the phone, and he's you know, as things are starting to open up and as folks are being vaccinated, OJJDP has told us that the virtual visits that we had started, that we were conducting, are actually not counting. And so we've got a pretty robust list of facilities that we need to be inspecting and visiting over the next year. It's a very long list. I'm happy to share it in its entirety if folks are interested, but I know Ryan's going to be working hard, and others in support of that, Lindsay and the rest of the JCP team in support of his getting out and inspecting facilities. So again, that work is ramping up, and it's going to be a pretty heavy lift around those facility inspections. So know that that's moving forward. A couple of other things really quickly. I know we're going to lose Eric. Eric, appreciate your participation in today's meeting. So I know you've got to sign off, and I'll try to wind this up here in a little bit. Summer learning and enrichment, as I think folks know, the Oregon Department of Education has made quite a few, like, I don't know, $200 million plus, or nearly $200 million available to schools and school districts and other partners to support summer learning and enrichment. Oregon Community Foundation has also got $40 million that is being passed on to them from the Oregon Department of Education, where community-based organizations, tribes, and others can apply for dollars for summer learning and enrichment. So we've been a part of those conversations and trying to get the word out through our connections about the dollars available, and tried to time, frankly, some of our requests for application around, and be sensitive to the fact that there's just so many deadlines that organizations are managing right now. So a lot going on around summer learning and enrichment. And you know, I'm sitting on an advisory committee with the Oregon Community Foundation. I know Celeste is involved and engaged in some of that work. Other staff and council members are pretty engaged too. So the summer learning and enrichment work for this summer and beyond is going strong. I'll take a pause. Any questions up to this point? I wanted to note that a quick update on the strategic plan. We put together it's a couple pages long kind of update on things that are moving forward. Melissa will have to help me remind me if we actually sent that out to the council or not. We've been bombarding you with lots of information. So if not, we can post-meeting send you, it's a couple of pages that Cord put together with input from staff around how we're progressing with the strategic plan. So we're making progress. The changes you're seeing around the RFA, the work that's happening on a policy front, our internal conversations that we're having around courageous conversations and equity are all key pieces that are moving forward that I think are elements or actions from our strategic plan. So we're excited to be moving that forward. Another thing that I wanted to make folks aware of is that the mission statement, and I put this in the director's report that I shared, we tweaked just a little bit, and I put that kind of the old version, revised version. I don't think we need to take another vote. That would be like the third or fourth vote on our mission statement. We just, I think, made it a little more active and tried to tighten up the language. So the Strategic Planning Committee met on that a couple of weeks ago, not a couple of weeks, I should say probably a month and a half ago, to tighten that up. But I feel really good about where we're at with that. I'll just read to you the revised version. Cord and I have been playing a little bit with the idea whether we need to say YDC, YDD, and just actually refer to ourselves as Oregon Youth Development. So think about just like Oregon Youth Development aligns systems and invests in communities to ensure equitable and effective services for youth ages 6 through 24. Throughout Oregon and tribal nations, we support educational and career success, disrupt youth crime and violence, and affirm youth strengths and safety. This is, again, a lot of the language that was in the prior version. You have a report if you want to weigh in, but again, in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward. And then we'll get you like a full-on 1 or 2 page long strategic plan update post-meeting so that you can kind of see how things are proceeding. I'm planning on pulling together some group, whether it's our executive committee and or kind of our former strategic planning committee folks, to just ensure that at the YDC level, we are continuing to get the council's input. And we've got some work to do to create some new committees and get some more engagement from the council. But again, I think we're making progress on the strategic plan. And I'll mention one other thing, and that is Cord and I have been meeting about communications and are developing a communications plan as well, that we've had some good meetings internally with the Oregon Department of Education, who's been helping kind of just provide some guidance and some tools around communication planning. So more to come. Any questions on strategic plan? I know Karen probably had to jump off, but she has received kind of the quick overview of our progress. And so I'm going to check in with her at the end of the week. Any questions there? I mentioned courageous conversations. In the internal conversations, I'll say, hey, if you're, as a council member, you're interested in participating in our internal conversations around equity and diversity and inclusion, you're welcome to join us. They happen once a month at our staff meeting. We can kind of let you know the schedule, or if you have resources to share in that regard, we totally welcome any resources that folks have. We're doing some key trainings around diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. So staff are taking advantage of those trainings. Last couple of items, I know I'm speaking quickly here, around reopening. The Department of Administrative Services and an interagency work group are organizing around reopening with the goal to start to open buildings by September 1st. And you know, we've had some internal conversations where I think around September 1st, we'll start to see real movement in this. Although this summer, I think there'll be a few things happening. One of those anything that we're able to do this summer, I think is going to happen when and if the governor lifts her executive order, which could happen maybe potentially toward the end of this month. But once the executive order that's like restricting travel and requiring people to work, remotely, once that happens, I think we'll be able to take some more intentional steps and make some better plans, right, about when we can start having in-person meetings, when can we just get out and visit our grantees. So stay tuned for more about reopening, but I noted some of these items in my director's update, and know that I'm thinking a lot about what makes sense for our staff. I mean, I think one of the things we'll have to keep in mind is, like, I'm totally 100% supportive of remote work, and we only really have resources for people to like fully be outfitted and maintain like one workstation. So we'll have to think about how we manage for that. But our staff have been tremendously productive and engaged throughout this period. And so I, want to anticipate as much as possible how they can continue the good work and not, have to necessarily be on the road and driving back and forth to the office. I included some great updates from a couple of our grantees at the end of my report. Again, in the interest of time, I'll just allow you to please read those. One was from one of our Reengagement Opportunity Grants that was just exciting, and also a nice update from the Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Tribe of Indians and a community investment grant. So we appreciate these highlights from, and maybe if we have a few seconds at the end of the meeting, if there's any grantees out there who is a part of the public comment, or I know Jaime has been a great storyteller for us. So if there's time at the end, maybe we can add any of those highlights from grantees. But no, in the director's report, I did put a few things that you're welcome to read on your own time. So deep breath. Questions? All right, not hearing any. I appreciate the time. We think we have a few minutes here now, but I know we're probably behind time a little bit. Committee reports, which I think should be actually pretty short and sweet. I'll turn it back over to you, Celeste.
Great. And it looks like Youth Committee, let's jump in right now. Maricela, is there a Youth Committee report?
Yeah, I can. So Maricela Ortega, she, her pronouns. I'm the development manager at Verde and chair of the youth subcommittee. So we last met on May 14th. We began to explore what a YDC Youth Summit would look like, what our priorities would be, what our goals would be. Most of us will attend the CJJ annual conference. We'll be attending virtually. We also began to talk about what a YDD or YDC social media presence would look like for us, and how we might structure that. Let's see. We also talked about a YDC mentorship for just to connect council members and youth, to get youth, to help them stay engaged. In my time here on the council, we've had a lot of turnover, and so we're really just trying to figure out why that's happening and how we can continue to engage youth. We also gave Brian some recommendations for YDC candidates, and he's looking into that. And so I think that we'll be hearing about some of those folks. And yeah, that's it. That's our highlights. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. And I hope that in the next meeting, we can explore some of those topics more. We had a really nice mentorship conversation recently. Okay, next, Workforce and Reengagement Committee. I know since Jeff is not here, Jared, I think, were you going to give the report out?
That is correct. Thanks, Celeste. So yeah, the Workforce and Reengagement Committee meeting that was scheduled to happen in May, we actually decided to cancel it just because there wasn't a lot of pressing business at the time. So rather than force everyone to give up 2 hours of their day, we decided to just send a report out to the committee instead. So I'll just provide a synopsis of that report. So as you all know, we have awarded, it was almost $4 million for the last 6 months to 36 different re-engagement grants across the state. That includes 28 re-engagement opportunity grants, 4 regional re-engagement grants, and 4 technical assistance grants. And those grants have been going really well. We've gotten 1 quarter's worth of reports from those grants, with the second quarter coming in July. But based on those first quarter reports, we already have some great data. Over 1,200 youth were contacted for those programs. Over 800, actually 872 were enrolled. We've had 559 who have completed some high school credit or GED tests, 30 who have earned a high school diploma, and 19 who have earned a GED credential. So despite the short timeline, 6 months grants, it's been going really well. And we've been getting a lot of success stories from that. Another thing that we've been doing recently is that we have started what we're calling re-engagement convenings. It's sort of a virtual roundtable where we're just bringing together all of our re-engagement grantees. We're having 4 sessions. We've already had 2. It's really just an opportunity to bring grantees together, talk about what's going on out there, have them all meet each other, know who else is a recipient of a grant as we're trying to build this system, talk about any challenges they're facing, any barriers, any successes, and just share best practices and get to just start that conversation. And so some of the interesting information and successes that we got from that were that just to share a few general successes, programs have really been doing a great job of providing dedicated student success coaches that especially have lived experience. So that's really focusing on that case management and one-on-one coaching. Programs have been really great at trying to recruit youth by going where they are. So we had somebody yesterday share that they kind of go to like the local skate park and try to just find youth who are disengaged out there, and that's been working really well for them. Really intentional about those outreach pieces. And then just as we develop that system work, really just developing those partnerships in those communities for outreach. And just there's been a lot of communication with all the grantees in the system and as they develop those partnerships and work together. So it's been really positive. We're looking forward to the next round of reports and of course the next set of grants or applications that will come in. And as mentioned earlier, that RFA is open, as is the workforce RFA. So more to come on those as we close out the current grants and launch into the new ones in July. And that's my update.
Wonderful, thank you. There's a lot going on right now. Thank you for the update. Anya, I'm assuming, are you going to do the update for Molly, or is there any additional things that you'd like to share after our earlier segment?
I think our earlier segments really covered it all.
Great.
So unless committee members have anything else to add. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, Karen, Strategic Planning Committee.
And I think Karen was on earlier, right? But then needed to jump off right around 11. So I think the main piece was the mission piece, which I read to you and also included in my director's report, so folks can refer to that. We'll send an update as to how we're progressing with the strategic plan. And as I said, Cord put together a real nice couple of pages organized by each of the overarching goals and kind of where we're seeing progress and momentum. So we'll get that shared out so people can have a sense of where we're going. And then we'll also organize, a gathering of kind of a new group, a new committee that I have yet to totally think through how that's going to work, but we'll get together this summer to drive some more engagement among council on the plan.
That sounds great. Thank you, Brian. We will stay tuned to hear more and just to see that exciting work that Karen's led continued. That is all for committee reports, I believe. The last item on the agenda is public comment. And I was looking to find out, Lindsay, if we have any members of the public who have signed up. No, okay. Well, in that case, I appreciate your time and attention. I know this is a long time away from family and work, but we accomplished a lot today. I just have to express my gratitude to the council and to the staff for the tremendous work that's happening. Lots of good conversation today and lots of great action taken. So I look forward to what comes ahead. This is a reminder for council members. Our next quarterly meeting is September 9th, so please make sure that's on your calendar. I think we have, I don't know if we've put a block or a hold, but if there isn't one, if you could go ahead and do that on your calendar so we make sure that you're available. Quorum is, of course, just so important. So whatever you can do to try to protect that day, September 9th, for the Youth Development Council, I would greatly appreciate it, as would the rest of the council and the team. Thank you again. I don't have any last comments. I want to look to Brian. Does any last, is there anyone who would like to share a story or something to end on, or any staff members who have any last comments to share?
No stories? I was texting Jaime, but Jaime's already off, so he's somebody, maybe a grant manager has a little something they want to share. That's pressure, I know. Maybe we'll all just appreciate 10 minutes of found time.
All right, thank you, everyone. This has been a great meeting, and I look forward to seeing you all in September. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.